there's a little bit of egg on the EPA's face for this, right? And in many cases, people don't want to necessarily have it shown that what they didn't do caused something.
I'm here in a toxic town in Indiana where groundwater contamination has caused nearly 40 cases of pediatric cancer from 2008 to 2022. There's probably been more since then. By the looks of the town, though, you wouldn't know it. Franklin is about a 30-minute drive south from downtown Indy. It's a town that has it all, from new subdivisions to a charming little downtown to a small private four-year college to above-average public schools. All of that is great, right? Only one problem, however. There's a rather large elephant in the room, and that would be the fact that there's been an abnormal amount of children in this town that have been diagnosed with cancer. That's something that you wouldn't know by just looking around or by doing a basic amount of research on the place before moving here. Most people probably think of Franklin as being a nice, small college town that's in close range to Indianapolis, a town that's been growing in population and has a growing economy, and to their credit, for the most part, that's what Franklin is. Except for one big thing that isn't really the fault of the city. It actually seems like the city of Franklin is doing what it can to fill in the void of what the state of Indiana and what the EPA should be doing. Speaking of what people should and should not be doing, this is the northeast side of Franklin, where you shouldn't want to buy a home, or work, or go to school, or have the attitude of, oh shucks, it won't happen to me. That was years ago. Because that's how long the groundwater has been polluted here. Years. No, excuse me. Sorry, decades. In fact, this small area has put Johnson County in the 80th percentile of childhood cancer rates out of all of the nation's counties. From 2008 to 2022, there have been 79 children diagnosed with cancer in Johnson County, and the majority of the kids that were diagnosed lived in Franklin. Learning about this came as a complete shock to me. I once lived about a half hour south of Franklin for about a 4-year stretch from around 2004 to 2008. I've had family in the area my whole life too, but I never knew about this until a few months before I uploaded this video. Makes you wonder how many people moved to Franklin and bought a home in the contaminated area without realizing that they were buying a home that's sitting on toxic land. All of the homes that you see here along Glendale Drive are within the contaminated area. Alright, so here's the backstory on what happened. From 1961 to 1983, a company called Bendix operated at 980 Hurricane Road. The company generated metal sludges, solvents of volatile organic compounds, and cyanide solutions. Contamination is believed to have begun during that 2-decade stretch, as Bendix was releasing those chemicals into the environment and the city sewer system the entire time. It wasn't discovered that there was a problem, however, until 1984, when Amphenol purchased the site. They didn't want to do anything about it, though, except for further contaminate the soil and groundwater through releasing trichloroethylene, or TCE, throughout their 5-year operation. Amphenol sold the site to Franklin Power Products in 1989, who already operated out of a location not far south of the 980 Hurricane Road site. As I illustrate on the map, these industrial sites are surrounded by single-family residential zones. Anyway, Franklin Power Products also released TCE into the environment and sewer system, which has further contaminated the groundwater in northeast Franklin. Another major contaminant in the groundwater here is tetrachloroethylene, or PCE. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention list both PCE and TCE as cancer-causing elements. Once again, discovery of environmental contamination wasn't made until 1984, which was over 2 decades after contamination first begun. A serious cleanup effort wasn't made until 1995, which was 11 years after the first discovery. At that time, a pump and treat system was installed and is still in use today, but that has only done so much to remove the toxins, as the groundwater has proven to still be contaminated years after the system was installed. We're passing by the 980 Hurricane Road site right now. It's on the left, and you wouldn't know anything was wrong by just looking at it, which has been the case for a very long time. Cleanup efforts have been slow, just like with most contaminated sites. Cleanups cost responsible parties a lot of money, and the problem is that nobody wants to be held responsible for it, so oftentimes these companies will buy time. They'll not do anything about their mess for as long as they possibly can until public pressure forces them to. Unfortunately, the state of Indiana hasn't been much help over the years. So back in 1984, the first sampling of the site was conducted. The study revealed serious levels of soil and groundwater contamination of cancer-causing chemicals. A lot of the damage was done in the 1960s before strong regulations were put into place, but the discovery was in 1984 when what we knew about this stuff was well established, and it still took them 11 years to install a system which only scratched the surface on the amount of effort that was truly needed to clean up the groundwater in Northeast Franklin. In 1995, the EPA said that the effect of the contamination could be significant. Could be. So they weren't sure. The EPA said that more testing was needed to better understand the scope and if the proposed cleanup technique would be effective. That being said, there's not much evidence out there that shows that the EPA conducted more studies to better understand the contamination, and there's not much evidence suggesting that the EPA has implemented more cleaning techniques after their 1995 memo, even though they acknowledged that more work was needed to be done. Between 1995 and 2010, not much, if anything, was done by the EPA about the known contamination in Franklin. Decades of neglect has led towards a growing underground plume of toxic groundwater. This image is a part of a geophysical survey that was put together by Indianapolis-based Mundell in April 2021. It's not a factual map, rather, this map was put together to help guide the selection of additional groundwater sampling locations that could be needed. The colored areas on the map identifies preferential flow pathways for chlorinated volatile organic compounds within the groundwater, or where the underground plume could be. Otherwise, this just suggests that the problem here hasn't gotten any better over the years. It's only gotten worse. Since the EPA hasn't been doing their job of protecting the people from environmental contamination, and since state health officials have said that there wasn't a cancer cluster in Franklin, the 2021 survey completed by Mundell was funded by the nonprofit If It Was Your Child, that was formed by parents who have had children that were diagnosed with cancer in the affected area. The nonprofit has been leading the way in holding the EPA, Amphenol, Franklin Power Products, and the state responsible for cleaning up the groundwater. The group wrote a letter to the EPA's Office of Inspector General in late 2018, calling out the EPA for serious mismanagement and significant delays in cleaning up the Amphenol site. They also wanted to know why nothing had been done yet to clean up the site, despite the EPA's acknowledgement of the discovery of toxic contamination decades prior. This is from 1985, when an assessment from the site mentions how a nearly 8,000-pound spill of hydrochloric acid, a leaking plating room floor, and a damaged sewer line discharging from the site could be a potential hazard to the environment and nearby residents through the groundwater and surface water, with Hurricane Creek running right by the property. Additional eyeball-raising concerns includes that Indiana American Water operated a well field less than a mile from the 980 Hurricane Road site, which supplied Franklin its drinking water for a long time. A total of 3 wells were used, in which 2 of them were discontinued by 2007, and all 3 were closed down by 2013. While the state government claims that at no time during the operation of the former Webb well field was the water from any of the wells considered to be unsafe for public consumption, it's hard to believe that to be true if you ask me. Why else would you close down the wells? They continue on in the same statement to list the details of the contamination found in the groundwater nearby. In the end, Indiana American Water closed the wells due to the pollutants that were above safe amounts in the raw water. That being said, I now bring in John Mundell of Mundell and Associates, who has not only worked on many contaminated areas throughout the country, including many Superfund sites, but he has extensive experience working on the situation in Franklin. All right, John, the first thing that pops out to me when looking at all of this in Franklin is that the EPA over the years has continued to just sweep the northeast side of Franklin under the rug. I mean, the first discovery of groundwater contamination was like all the way back in 1984. And decades later, we're still seeing parents of sick children who are joining together, and now they're hiring people like you to do the research and do the studies to identify the contamination in the groundwater with the hopes of eventually getting everything cleaned up.
Well, I think your perception was very close to what happened, really. I was one of the first consultants who discovered that impact back in 1984 with a company called ATEC Associates. I was a young staff engineer with a lot less gray in my beard. In fact, no gray in my beard at that time. And we found impacts at this industrial site in Franklin. And we had recommended additional studies be performed to determine the full extent of the contamination below the ground. And so that was discovered at that period of time. And then probably within a year after that, I became unattached to that project. I no longer was working on that particular project. And in fact, our company was no longer working on that project. And so I kind of lost track of it, and I often wondered over the years, I wonder what happened. Did the next consultant define the problem? Did the regulatory agency come in and do anything? But I really lost track of it. And then in 1998, I was contacted by a company, Edison Wetlands Association, to see if I might be interested in looking at this site in Franklin that they had concerns about health impacts from contamination. And of course I said, oh yeah, sure, I'd really be interested in that. Franklin, I've worked there in the past. And lo and behold, when I began looking at this new site, this new data, I realized, oh my gosh, this was deja vu. It was a flashback, several decades earlier, having found these impacts. And now I was getting a chance to review what the status was. And I found that, wow, they still haven't finished cleaning up this site up. And so it began the process of looking at what had happened over the last several decades. What was the whole history? Why was this still an issue? And that began our company, Mundell and Associates, involvement in this particular project.
What chemicals exactly are in the groundwater in Franklin?
The chemicals that were released from this industrial site into the sewer system were mainly chlorinated solvent compounds like trichloroethylene, as a primary one, perchloroethylene, and also then as a result of those breakdown products, sometimes those chemicals break down into other forms of chlorinated compounds. And so what we were finding in the subsurface were that those suite of compounds related to degreasing operations, and that kind of got discharged into the sewer line that went along the street. And then it was a leaky sewer, so those compounds, those chemicals leaked out into the subsurface, and as a result, over time, they were dispersed in the groundwater and the soil along the sewer line and underneath the ground near the sewer line, and mainly chlorinated solvents, which is a very typical industrial chemical situation. In the United States, we have thousands and thousands of sites that have been impacted by chlorinated solvents over the years, whether they be from dry cleaners or industrial facilities that in their manufacturing processes use degreasing as a way of cleaning metal parts and those kind of things. So, yeah.
This is Webb Elementary School, located just southeast of 980 Hurricane Road. The chemicals that John was mentioning, TCE and PCE for short, were found in the groundwater underneath Webb Elementary back in 2019. Another elementary school is located just north of Webb, that being Needham Elementary, and that school also had these toxic chemicals lurking underneath the school. That being said, I went ahead and asked John how having these toxic chemicals in the groundwater underneath an elementary school or underneath somebody's house can affect the health of the people inside the building.
And how do these chlorinated solvents, how do they affect people's health once they get into the groundwater? And let's say it's in the groundwater below somebody's house. How does that affect somebody's health?
Well, what happens, there are a couple things that could happen depending on the particular site. Obviously, if someone had their own drinking water wells in the same area, those wells could actually pull contaminated water up and people could drink the water. In Franklin's case, that wasn't the case. There were no people drinking the water directly beneath their homes. But in this case, because the chemicals came out in the sewer line and they were dispersed, the chemicals resided beneath many of the homes. And the homes, as a result of vapor intrusion, could pull those chemical vapors that were present beneath the homes up into the homes and actually be in indoor air. So that's, in this particular Franklin case, that's the primary, what we call the exposure pathway, in which, chemicals that volatilize come up from the groundwater and come up and move actually also into the sewer lines attached to the homes and also through the leaky basements, if you will, and they can come into the home air and have the people breathe that air.
And do people know that they're breathing this air? Does it have a scent to it, or is it just people are not able to notice that they're breathing it in?
Yeah, over time, these particular chemicals, they aren't at concentrations that people notice, oh, wow, that's a chemical smell. So no, they can go undetected depending on what the levels are. They can go undetected, and they had for decades, right?
Okay.
And so yeah, at very, very high concentrations, if you put your nose in a jar of water containing chlorinated solvents at high concentrations, you can begin to smell them. But at the concentrations where they could actually impact human health, these can go undetected.
Another problem that Franklin continues to run into is having enough factual data to label Franklin as being an official cancer cluster, which you could say is due to the EPA and the state neglecting to conduct studies and research on the site. Heck, you might also be wondering why 980 Hurricane Road in Franklin hasn't even been listed as a Superfund site. I know that's what I wondered, and I went ahead and asked John, who has more knowledge and experience with this stuff than I do, what he thought about that.
So why is this site in Franklin, one of the things that I've been wondering personally is how has this not been detected as a Superfund site?
Well, that's a good question. I think because a little bit of the history, to become a Superfund site, the EPA has to decide to give it a certain ranking, to get into the NPL list. And they go through a ranking system that scores a site based on the number of people that are impacted, the severity of the impacts, and several other factors. And this site was already kind of in, what happens is in this site, it was a known industrial site that had caused this, right? So they are kind of ultimately responsible for the investigation and cleanup, and for paying for that kind of work. And so, in this case, because it was already in the system, and work was being done, and there was work over these decades being done. It was just not effective, and we can go into what happened there, but it wasn't being effective. At some point, when we became involved, we had to re-engage the EPA and the Indiana Department of Environmental Management at a level that we could say, hey, listen, there should be concerns here. Look at what we're finding. So in essence, to become a Superfund site, it has to go through a regulatory process, and it's the regulators who have to make that decision. And in this case, they had not done that because it was a process to even get them aware that there was a problem again.
So do you think if the EPA did do the necessary steps to determine the contamination in the groundwater, do you think the site in Franklin would have qualified as a Superfund site if it wasn't as complicated of a process?
You know, and there's a lot of what ifs in there. You know, I've been doing the environmental work for a long time. Back in 1984, if the work had been done to completely define the extent of the problem, and by the way, as a problem sits there for decades, it tends to get bigger, right? The chemicals kind of can move in the groundwater larger, the plume can become larger if they aren't doing effective cleanup. And so in 1984, this problem probably was off-site, off from the industrial site, but it may have not been a great distance off-site. So maybe at that time there were only a handful of houses that were impacted. Well, Superfund sites, when you get scored, if there are only 5 or 6 houses or 10 houses, it's not as significant as something where we might have, hundreds of houses or something more substantial. So I can't say that it would have risen up to the level of the Superfund at that time, especially at that time. And I recall, because I worked on a number of Superfund sites, there were lots of other candidates that had a lot more notoriety, Love Canal, other Superfund sites in Indiana that were much worse and with larger impact. So I can't say this. All I can say, though, is without addressing impacts that could be impacting people's health, if that happens over a long period of time, those impacts can accumulate. If someone's breathing in air and they breathe it in for 30 years versus 5 years, that can have an impact on their health, or it has the potential to do so.
So one of the other big problems that this group of mothers are running into, as a refresher, there's a group of mothers who put together a nonprofit to try to fight this and try to get this cleaned up. One of the problems that they're running into is that Franklin is not considered to be a cancer cluster town. And that's causing problems in terms of getting more funding and getting things moving forward and getting things cleaned up. How is Franklin not considered to be a cancer cluster town?
That's a very good question. And I think there are maybe disagreements among technical people who review these kind of things about what causes a cancer cluster. Now, I'm not a PhD toxicologist. Those are health professionals that look toward cause and effect. Can someone who has been exposed to TCE, trichloroethylene, a solvent, be impacted to the extent that it can affect an organ that can cause cancer, that can make someone die? What's difficult in the whole cause and effect thing is there have been very few cases in the United States where someone can say, yeah, that was caused by exposure to a particular chemical. Your disease or your cancer was specifically caused by that, because all the other factors didn't add up. So it's a tough, sometimes it's a tough thing to prove scientifically because there are other factors going on. In this case, the folks who determine whether there's a cancer cluster or not are you have PhDs who look at these things and use statistical methods and all kinds of methods to determine is this a cancer cluster or not. And it's been a while since I've looked at how they've done this, but at some point they had not deemed this significant enough to say, there are so many people with this kind of cancer that TCE targets, and therefore it's a cancer cluster. However, I believe the folks in Franklin, the mothers who were the group who really brought this site to everyone's attention, I think they felt that there was not enough data that was reviewed by the agency to determine that accurately. And so there's a dispute, and you can have people disputing things, but I think there was a concern in Franklin that enough young people had health effects in the city that would have caused this awareness of needing to do something, in this case, pretty drastically. And so it's a unique thing. There's the other thing on this is this, I will say. There's a little bit of egg on the EPA's face for this, right? And in many cases, people don't want to necessarily have it shown that what they didn't do caused something. And so there's a natural tendency to have to defend positions by agencies. In this case, defending that what they did, what didn't cause anyone harm and that sort of thing. So all that to say, I'm not an expert toxicologist at that level to say, I believe there should be a cancer cluster, but certainly the moms of Franklin gathered a lot of information and made people take a very careful look at this. Now, the good thing is there have been some things that have been done as a result of the studies that we completed. Some levels of remediation that were completed that have improved the potential for this to kind of decrease over time. But we are still not there yet, and we can talk about that. There are some other things that we had pointed out that may still represent concerns.
By the way, make sure to look down below, find that subscribe button, hit it, like it, and let me know what you think about all of this in the comments section. Additionally, I'll have a second video uploaded on my second channel called Chris Harden's Travel Archives, where you can find the rest of my interview with John Mundell, along with all of the footage that I filmed of Franklin but didn't use in this video, so make sure to check that out. Once again, the link for that video will be down below, once it's uploaded. Otherwise, Franklin is considered to be a fairly nice growing town in south-central Indiana. It's in a good location, being not far from the growing city of Columbus to the south, and it's close enough to Indianapolis to economically benefit from suburban sprawl. As you can see here, Franklin has never experienced population loss between census counts throughout its history. Speaking of history, let's talk about it some. Franklin is the county seat of Johnson County, which was organized in 1822. Shortly after, the town of Franklin was platted in the center of Johnson County in 1823 to be the county seat. The town grew quickly with early access to railroads, incorporating with 2,000 residents shortly after its founding. Downtown Franklin today is a historic district, with most of the buildings being built between 1850 and 1935. You can definitely feel the old historic vibes when going through downtown Franklin today, and there's hardly a vacant storefront to be seen, so that's all good and dandy. Up ahead, the Artcraft Theater is one of those buildings, and we'll see it shortly. Being first built as a silent theater in 1922, the Artcraft was closed for a small stretch between 2000 and 2004, which isn't near as long of a gap that you would usually find for historic theaters in downtown areas. Usually, they close sometime in the 70s or the 80s, and they're closed for a couple of decades before being renovated and brought back to life. Anyway, the Artcraft is surrounded by other historic buildings that are occupied by restaurants and shops, making it a really nice area to go spend some time. So if you live in the area, downtown Franklin has a lot of what you would want to spend a night out on the town with if you enjoy experiencing those small historic town vibes. Also, Franklin has long been associated with its private four-year college. Being founded in 1834, Franklin College is one of the state's 5 oldest institutions for higher education. It was the first college of Indiana to become co-ed in 1842.
Sexist.
Yeah, I mean, before 1842, not now. Anyway, along with downtown being a historic district, the campus of Franklin College is actually its own historic district as well, with Old Main, the longest standing building, being built back in 1847. The college was first founded by a group of Baptists, and it was initially called Indiana Baptist Manual Labor Institute. But in 1844, the Indiana General Assembly changed the name to Franklin College. Franklin has a nice collection of historic homes to complement the downtown and the college. These homes have also been well kept up with over the years. That's where being in close proximity to Indianapolis comes into play, as Franklin has always been able to keep up with being a middle-class city throughout the years. Some of the more notable people to call Franklin home includes current Nevada head basketball coach Steve Alford and current Detroit Tigers outfielder Max Clark. Well, people, it is now that time. What did we learn in this video? We learned that no matter how nice the town, you can't always trust the groundwater, just like how on vacation in Florida, you can't always trust what's lurking in the water, but you can always trust Chris's livability score.
Education.
This is Franklin Community High School, home to the Grizzly Cubs. It's one of the better performing high schools in South Central Indiana. Students score above the state average in math and reading, but a little bit below average in science. The graduation rate is 89%. Personally, I would like to see that be a little bit higher, but overall, Franklin High School is considered to be a pretty good high school to attend, as are the rest of the schools in the Franklin Community School District. Toxic vapors aside at Webb and Needham Elementary, of course, education gets a 14 out of 20.
Crime.
Franklin residents don't have much to worry about in this category, as it's one of the safer cities in all of Indiana, with a violent crime rate under 100 for every 100,000 residents, and a property crime rate well below the state average as well. It gets a 19 out of 20.
Downtown.
For a small town that's seen a bunch of suburban development over the years and will likely continue to, it seems as if the historic downtown will always stay the same. It's fully occupied too, which is nice. Downtown gets a 15 out of 20.
Economy.
Franklin is off of I-65 between Indianapolis and Louisville. The I-65 corridor has seen a lot of distribution centers get built off of it in the last couple of decades. In Franklin, there's a Target distribution center among other large industries just east of the interstate exit. There's also plenty of industry throughout the north end of town, and Indianapolis is nearby too, in which a lot of the residents make the commute for better paying jobs up north. Columbus isn't too far south either, and that city is home to Cummins headquarters. Franklin might not be the richest city, but it's a pretty strong middle-class city, I would say, which is becoming harder to find as time goes on. Economy gets a 13 out of 20.
Environment.
With all of the cities that have had toxic contamination of some sort that I've been making videos on, it's only fitting that I add a category for environment. I've also added an environmental score to all of the places that I've scored so far. Anyway, as you can imagine, I've been a little bit too professional in this video, and a little bit too positive on the livability score so far, so it's time now for some negativity. There's no getting around it. The toxic groundwater in Franklin is not being addressed by either the state or the EPA in a timely fashion, and it's poisoning a lot of kids and adults. The city of Franklin is mad about it, the residents are mad about it, the school teachers are mad about it. Outside of the northeast part of the town, the rest of Franklin would be safe to live in, but because of that, environment gets a 5 out of 20 because you're rolling the dice if you're buying a house anywhere on the east side of Franklin.
Recreation.
More negativity here, as central Indiana lacks outdoor recreation greatly. There's a few nice parks in the city with a few golf courses, but you can find those things in just about every Indiana town that's the size of Franklin. You can head southwest to Brown County and enjoy some nice hiking, but otherwise, Franklin is surrounded by cornfields. To the north, it's just suburban sprawl with not much to see or do. To the south, it's just cornfields and Columbus. You'd have to drive quite a ways before you find outdoor recreation options. Recreation gets a 4 out of 20.
History.
Other than how old some of the buildings are and how nicely they've been preserved, Franklin isn't known for a great historic event or anything. Really, it's just the age of the college and the downtown area that will make this score high. It gives a 14 out of 20.
Amenities.
There's some good shopping in Franklin, you know, if you need to grab something from the store, anything, whether it's something for your house or a 6-pack of Mountain Dew, you can likely find what you need at a store off of 31 in Franklin. But if you consider yourself a step above a Mountain Dew drinking hilljack, one might be disappointed in the amount of options with shopping in Franklin. You might get bored living here pretty quickly too. There's more than just a Walmart here, so if you're a Walmart hater like me, at least Franklin has a Meijer. Despite there being a Target distribution center, however, you'll have to drive 20 minutes to the nearest Target. There is the Edinburgh Outlet Mall that's not too far south of Franklin that has pretty much every store that you could think of that would be at an outlet mall. Otherwise, for your fancier stores or for a Target or Best Buy, you'll have to drive north to Greenwood, which Greenwood's shopping scene isn't as highly regarded as it used to be 10 years ago. Amenities gets a 12 out of 20.
Cost of living.
As long as you stay away from the northeast side of Franklin when choosing a place to live, or maybe I should just say the entire east side, living in Franklin can be of great value. Homes are not that expensive here at all. Just keep in mind, once again, homes in the east side of Franklin are affordable for a reason with the underground plume of toxic groundwater. Franklin doesn't have the cheapest home prices in the region, but if you're one of my viewers from suburban Chicago or suburban Detroit, these prices for newer built homes in nice areas are unheard of. Cost of living gets a 19 out of 20. All in all, the Chris Livability score for Franklin, Indiana is 115 out of 180, giving it the highest score out of all of the places in Indiana that I've done this for so far. Once again, I used to live nearby. 4 years of my childhood spent in Columbus to the south, 5 years of my early adulthood living in the south side of Indianapolis to the north. Also, Granny Harden graduated from Franklin College many years ago. That's right, but I never knew about the contamination in Franklin until December 2024 when looking through social media news feeds. Kudos to the non-for-profit group called If It Was Your Child, because nobody would likely know that this was going on here if it wasn't for them. Well, to see another suburban city that's battled toxic industrial contamination in the Chicago area, watch this video here. We'll see you next time. Peace.